Welcome back to Davenant Academy and our class, An Introduction to the Reformation. I'm Dr. Brad Littlejohn, and today we're going to be talking about the political context of the Reformation. Now, this is really important to understand because as we go on, you're going to see that the Reformation was throughout every bit as much of a political event as a theological event. And in many ways, those were not two distinct things that sort of got tangled up in one another. They were two inseparable things, which makes sense given what we looked at in Lecture 2 about the way in which the Pope's claims were not merely theological claims, but were political claims. The Pope claimed to be the representative of God on earth, and in the most extreme forms, such as with Boniface VIII, the Pope claimed that all authority on heaven and earth was delegated to the Pope. And the Pope, therefore, had headship over the church and ultimately headship over kings and emperors as well. So let's go back to this model that we considered toward the end of that second class, the hierarchic model of authority. And in this model, as we said, you have this idea that authority flows downward from God and remains united. It flows from God to the priestly power, the spiritual power, which is to say, above all, the Pope. And the Pope then delegates the solid blue line. He is delegating power to the kingly power and then exercising spiritual power over the Christian people. So in this understanding, the king of France, the king of England, the Holy Roman Emperor, all the various authorities in Europe are ultimately acting on behalf of the Pope with the Pope's permission, and their authority goes no further than the Pope allows it. Now, in practice, as we saw, this model did not hold up very well in the face of political realities, but it continued to be in many quarters, the official theology of the Catholic Church. Now, contrast this with another model that ultimately comes to sum up the Protestant understanding of political and church authority. Now, this I call the Marcelian model, named after the 14th century, early 14th century political theorist Marsilius of Padua, who's a fascinating character who anticipates the doctrines of the Reformation in many interesting ways. We don't have time to talk about him here. Now, you'll see that this is a much more complex model, and this full model was not followed by, certainly by all Protestants. I'll say a bit about that in a moment. But one thing that you note here is this idea of delegation of authority. Remember, the solid line represents delegation of authority to the Christian people first. So this is a more democratic theory, which understands that God does not give authority. It's not God, king, people, but God, people, king. The king is delegated on behalf of the people. He rules over the people by their consent. So God delegates power to the people delegate power to the king, civil power, right? The blue represents civil power as opposed to spiritual power. And the king then exercises civil authority over the Christian people. Now, we do have here this delegation of spiritual authority, the red line, God delegating spiritual authority to the priests, and then them exercising it over the Christian people, and also exercising it over the king, the dotted red line. But this is different than how spiritual authority was largely understood in the medieval church, and for instance, in some of the two swords model that we looked at before, because Marsilius defines this spiritual authority much more narrowly. This is a teaching authority. It is not a coercive authority. It is not an authority that has any teeth in this life, per se. It is authority to teach the truth about God and our obligations to God. And if we do not follow this teaching, We can be held accountable to it. We can be punished, but not within this life, only by Christ himself after death. And so it's very different in this sense from the way that civil authority operates, where civil authority actually has teeth in this life. You're told to do something, you don't do it, you get punished. Now, that distinction then, that narrowing of the meaning of spiritual authority, carves out room for a third kind of authority, which I've signified here with the purple line, which is, we could say, a temporal authority in spiritual matters. Okay, so what is an example of this? Well, an example of this would be, in the Catholic Church, for instance, the archbishop having authority over the bishop, or the bishop having authority over the priests. Of course, Protestant churches have their own version of this. You have a denominational, perhaps general assembly. You have a moderator. You have a stated clerk. You have various relationships of authority within the church, which are not themselves a spiritual authority, in the sense that they are not. It's not as if the stated clerk is, preaching to the clergy, the pastors who are under him, and saying, repent now, or you'll be judged. You might have to say that, but more often it might be simply a sort of procedural thing, which is to say, please examine this candidate, for this new candidate in the ministry. Okay, please, send me a report recommending him. Now, this person has been admitted to the ministry, whatever. There are all these procedural elements of the church's life, which are not strictly spiritual, but they relate to the church. And these, in the Marceline model, as you see here, these temporal aspects of the church's life are delegated from the Christian people to their civil authorities, because their civil authorities are themselves Christians. They are leaders within. Marcellus is going to say that the church is the whole Christian people, and so the king, the prince, the emperor is a member of the Christian church. He is a leader within the Christian church, is he not? And therefore, it's appropriate for him to use that position of leadership to oversee these temporal aspects of the church's life. And this is going to become, in many ways, the dominant understanding in the Reformation, as the distinction between clergy and laity that we talked about in the second lesson, the strict distinction between the priests and the non-priests. As the Reformation breaks that down, there's going to be a new sense that the laity, the non-ordained Christians, the ones who are in positions of leadership in the society, should also be in positions of leadership within the church, not, again, overseeing preaching and sacraments, but overseeing the temporal aspects, the procedural aspects of the church's life. Now, let's move forward a bit then to looking at some of the particular political powers that were sparring at the time of the Reformation. Now, one of these, you may remember, of course, that Boniface VIII had a quarrel with the King of France, and quarrels between the popes and the King of France went a long way back. The Reformation era, or the Renaissance era, not quite the Reformation itself yet, was no exception. And this is King Francis I of France, Francis of France, very appropriately named. He was a bold, ambitious Renaissance monarch who was, like all kings of France, very concerned for the glory and power of France. And he was able to work out a deal with the Pope called the Concordat of Bologna in the year 1516, Concordat of Bologna. And according to this deal, he basically, it was a way of working through many of the long-standing conflicts between the Pope and the King of France about the extent to which the king could tax church lands. So the church had huge amounts of wealth and land, so the King of France didn't want it to be tax exempt, and he wanted to have a say in the appointment of bishops. And basically, he wanted to have a lot of authority over the temporal aspects of the church's life, things that didn't relate specifically to its spiritual functions. And ultimately, King Francis was able to negotiate the Concordat of Bologna, getting most of the things that he wanted, getting most of the authority over the church, the Roman Catholic Church in France that he wanted. And this is important. Indeed, this is an important theme through the Reformation, is that if you look at the areas where the Reformation succeeded and the areas where it did not succeed, generally the Reformation succeeded in those places, where the political leaders had not yet negotiated a satisfactory arrangement with the Pope. And there were places like France and Spain where the kings had already gotten a lot of independence for themselves, and therefore it was in their best interest to maintain the Catholic Church in France, the Catholic Church in Spain, because the Catholic Church in France was closely connected with the French monarchy and was supported its interests. Same thing with the Catholic Church in Spain. So the monarchs had a vested interest in maintaining the traditional church there, whereas in other places they did not have that interest. They, in fact, saw the church as a rival, a threat to their own power and their own policies that they were seeking to pursue. Now, of course, that rivalry was very real because the Pope did not merely make claims about all authority deriving from him, but quite concretely, he had a certain area of territory that was his own. This is an area in Italy known as the Papal States. So much of central and northern Italy was a territory that was directly governed by the Pope, or either directly, this dark purple area, or sort of feudal lords who were under the authority of the Pope. So the Pope was constantly, the Pope had his own army that he, in fact, Pope Julius II in the Renaissance era famously led his own army into battle several times and was mocked by many churchmen for doing so. But the Pope was squabbling with the Holy Roman Emperor, the Spanish, the French, fighting over territories in Italy through much of this period. He was very much one of the players in European politics. Now, the most important player in European politics is going to emerge in Spain during this period. This is a picture of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, who called themselves the Catholic monarchs, And until this time, there had been no country of Spain. There had been lots of different little kingdoms in Spain that had been gradually fighting to regain territory from the Moors, that is, the Muslims. Muslims had ruled Spain for hundreds of years. Various little kingdoms in Spain had been fighting to drive them out. Well, by the 1480s, these kingdoms have basically united into two. There were two main kingdoms. There was Castile, which controlled much of modern-day Spain, and there was Aragon, which controlled the northeastern part of Spain, and also instantly had territories in southern Italy. Well, the king of Aragon, Ferdinand, and the queen of Castile, Isabella, were married, thus uniting the crowns of Castile and Aragon and creating a united monarchy of Spain for the first time in history. And in the year 1492, they finished driving out the last Muslim forces in Spain, the stronghold of Granada in southern Spain, and thus uniting the Spanish peninsula, Iberian Peninsula, under Christian rule. Now, of course, in 1492, you may be aware something else important happens. Columbus, this fellow, sailed the ocean blue, and he did so on behalf of the Catholic monarchs, on behalf of Ferdinand and Isabella, to extend their authority to the New World. Of course, that's not what they thought at first. They thought they were finding a new trade route to the East Indies, to China and India. But once they discovered that it was actually a whole other continent, they were more than happy to claim that continent for Spain and for the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church in Spain that they were overseeing. So this sequence of events, the union of the crowns of Castile and Aragon, the consolidation of their authority in the Iberian Peninsula, and then, of course, the extension of their authority to the New World, means that in the space of just a few decades, Spain goes from not even existing as a country to being the preeminent power in Europe. the amount of gold that they brought back from the New World was enough to quickly catapult Spain to a position of military and naval preeminence. Now, this gets even more interesting. Hang on, let me show you this map here before I go on to the next bit. So on this map here, you see Europe around 1500. This shows the main power players at this time. So, of course, there you see the Papal States there in northern central Italy. Kingdom of Naples and Sicily is united to the Spanish crown. Okay, you have France, of course, which controls roughly modern-day France. England, roughly modern-day England. Okay, a lot of these are actually remarkably similar to some modern territories. But then you've got this big purple blob in the middle, the Holy Roman Empire. Now, of course, in practice, the Holy Roman Empire was not a single blob. There were hundreds of tiny little territories within it. Some of them as small as a single city, others large provinces that had a lot of authority to govern themselves. And, you know, they would help out the emperor sometimes, but often the emperor's authority was fairly nominal. But there were areas in the Holy Roman Empire that the emperor controlled fairly directly. These were the area in Austria, near Vienna, and also the Low Countries, Netherlands, and modern-day Netherlands and Belgium, which were united, had not been part of the Holy Roman Empire, but they were united to the crown of Austria by a series of marriages in which the Habsburg royal family of the Holy Roman Empire married with the House of Burgundy and gained control of these territories in eastern France and modern-day Netherlands and Belgium. So by the year 1500, the Holy Roman Empire is larger than it has been in a very long time, and that's about to become even larger in many ways. And that is because this fellow here, Charles V, pictured here as a young man, he becomes Holy Roman Emperor at the age of 19, in the year 1519. And he ruled over a greater territory than anyone before, or perhaps by some measures since. Because, as I said, there's a series of marriages and also a series of marriages that die childless. And the result of all this is that Charles inherits quite a number of different crowns. Okay, he inherits the crown of the Holy Roman Empire and now its extensive dominions in Central Europe and also the Netherlands. But he also inherits the crown of Spain and the Kingdom of Naples, which controls the southern Italy, and the New World, all of its vast territories in the New World. So Charles has the ambition to be the universal Catholic emperor who is showing the universality of the Catholic faith. The Catholic Church is supposed to be the universal church of the whole world, and Charles V is going to be the universal Catholic emperor. So Charles V's ambitions to unite Europe under his reign are going to be a key feature of the political context of the Reformation era. But at the same time, you can imagine that his rivals were not very happy about this massive consolidation of power in one guy. And so part of the reason the Reformation is going to succeed is because people who otherwise might have been happy to assist the Holy Roman Emperor in stamping out heresy, which was the Holy Roman Emperor's job to do, people who otherwise would have been happy to assist him are not happy to assist him. They're actually looking for reasons to oppose him. And so the Protestant leaders in northern Germany, as we're going to see later on, are able to win their freedom in a way that other reform groups were quickly sort of hunted down and persecuted as heretics. Okay, now there's one other player in this political drama that needs to be introduced, and this is not him himself. This is his father. This is Henry VII of England. Now, Henry VII came to the throne in the year 1485 at the Battle of Bosworth. The Battle of Bosworth was the final battle of what are known as the Wars of the Roses, which was a period of intense civil war in England between rival claimants to the throne. Henry VII is able to he's distantly related to one of the family lines. He marries into the other one. A lot of the other claimants to the throne are killed in the war, and so he's sort of the last man standing and is able to establish peace and establish a new royal dynasty known as the Tudor dynasty. However, he recognizes this is a fragile situation, that if there's another dispute about succession to the throne in England, there could easily be another civil war. If there's another civil war, then one of England's adversaries, France or now Spain, might take advantage of that civil war to gain some influence or even control in England. So Henry VII does what all good fathers and all good political maneuverers in this period do. He arranges a marriage between his young son Arthur and Catherine of Aragon, shown here, the young daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. So he is going to unite the crown of England, which is, a decent-sized country, but not one of the most important countries in Europe. So he's going to unite England politically with what is now quickly becoming one of the great powers of Europe, Spain. Well, unfortunately, Arthur and Catherine, I think they married when he was 16, she was 15, something like that. They've been betrothed much earlier. Anyway, he dies very shortly after the marriage, dies dies childless. Okay, so that didn't work so well. Well, Henry VII is not going to let this opportunity go to waste. So now that Catherine's in England, he says, why don't you marry instead Arthur's brother, who then a couple years later takes the throne as Henry VIII. Of course, this picture isn't a couple years later, this picture a few decades later, but expanded a fair bit. But anyhow, this is the famous Henry VIII, who's going to play such an important role in England's Reformation. And his marriage to Catherine of Aragon is going to be a crucial battleground in that Reformation. So that story is for another day. But hopefully with this introduction, you have a sense of the key players in the Reformation period, the key political players, and why this is going to be such a fraught political context. You not only have the usual conflicts that you have between France and England, there are always going to be rivals. There's conflicts between the Charles V and all of those who want to weaken his power. But at the same time, cutting across all of this, we have the more fundamental conflict of what is the relationship of the Pope's power to civil authorities in general. What is their role in overseeing the church, and what is the church's role in overseeing them? And in the middle of all of these tensions, we are going to have a rather rash German monk lobs a bit of a rhetorical grenade in 1517, provoking the firestorm of the Protestant Reformation. So, with all of this introductory material now in lesson 5, in our next lesson, we will finally get to Luther, his 95 Theses, and the events that kicked off the Reformation proper. Look forward to seeing you again then.